Hello, everyone, and welcome into our Next Generation Leadership Chat. We are going to sort of do a slow intro here and let a few folks join the room that want to join the room over the next few minutes. While we're doing that, we'll sort of let you know a little bit about Next Gen. If you're new to viewing the Next Gen Leadership Academy videos, we're part of the University of Kentucky, and we run a leadership and teacher leadership academy all across the state. This is our 4th year doing it, and we work with schools on implementing transformative efforts for their school communities in the hopes that they implement one with fidelity, and then those districts sort of get good at change, and that rolls sort of from there. So that's a little bit of our Next Gen Leadership Academy. You can find out more about that at education.uky.edu if you are new to the site. Let me introduce myself just a little bit, and then we're going to bring in Gerry. So I am Justin Bathen. I'm a professor here in the College of Education and one of the faculty members, fellows of the Next Generation Leadership Academy. I've been in Kentucky for 7 years, and I work on law, technology, and reform kinds of issues. And I help to host a lot of the Next Gen leadership activities that we engage in. So, Gerry, how are you feeling? You feeling comfortable? Feeling really ready to begin?
Oh, I'm ready. Let's do it.
Awesome. So, joining me today is Dr. Gerry Swan, who's a professor here in curriculum and instruction at the College of Education at UK. Gerry has been here a little longer than myself, even. So we're like veterans of the College of Ed, Gerry. I've not thought about it that way before, but I guess we are. Yeah, exactly. So. Gerry has been part of the Next Gen Academy since the beginning as well, and Gerry helps us on a variety of fronts. He teaches in the instructional design program here and has background in engineering, and he's launched products that are widely used across Kentucky and the world, like the digital driver's license. So just a variety of experiences that Gerry brings to the table and works with our next generation leadership districts on. So today we're going to talk a little bit about standards-based grading. So Gerry, I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit more, whatever you feel like I might have left out, and also sort of talk a little bit about your interest in standards-based grading and where that came from.
Well, I guess I've always been involved in grading or some aspect of it because early in my career when I was a classroom teacher, I also did a lot of work for the school developing. This was sort of before the student information system really hit big and became kind of a business it is. So a lot of this was done in-house at school. So at the school I taught at, I worked with another teacher, and we designed everything from transcripts to report cards to weekly reports to grade books. And so that was sort of, I've kind of always had that role and played that role in sort of education. My current position, I work with all the teacher ed and educator preparation programs in the college to do sort of competency-based assessment, electronic portfolios, credentialing assessment. So, that's another aspect of basically grading people. So I would kind of say I've always done it in one form or another, and sort of a few years ago, my colleagues Tom Gusky and Leanne Young approached me to kind of help take some of the ideas that they had been studying for a while and sort of overcome some troubles that districts had dealing with the technology aspects and some of the implementation aspects, and kind of help take that home. And so that's sort of, I guess, where I became officially involved in standards-based grading. Although a lot of the stuff I was doing was probably related and connected to it before, but that's probably it. So I currently, through sort of the OTIS project, Snapshot, probably generate about 12,000 standards-based report cards every 9 weeks. It's awesome. I wouldn't trade it for the world. Actually, I would trade it for the world. I traded for a lot less than the world. I keep getting for a company to buy me out, and then so I can stop doing it. But alas, here I am.
Right. So a bit of an administrative burden, I am sure. So we have several viewers already in the room. That's great. glad you all are joining us. I know some of us are joining us live on our YouTube channel. If you want to actually pop into the Google Hangout, you're welcome to do that. You can do that from the Google Plus events page for those of you that had the invitation, or if you follow Gerry or I'm sure that's live on our Google Plus pages right now. If you are playing along, feel free to type questions either in the chat or on that Google Plus events page. Anything related to standards-based grading is fair game, and so if you want to get your question answered, the sooner the better, probably. So be sure to throw your questions over in the chat here in the live room, or on the Google Plus page, or on the YouTube page. I'm also checking that one if you want to throw your chat question down on the YouTube page. Okay, so to kick us off then, Gerry, can you give us a 1-minute primer on standards-based grading and how that's different than like traditional grading practices?
Wow, let's see. 1 minute. Well, basically, I mean, to me, I think the crux of it is, there's lots of different ways to think about this particular thing, but I think the crux of it is trying to make the grading and reporting process more meaningful and more valid and more fair. And the first thing you kind of have to look at is, well, what do grades typically consist of? And they consist of things related to achievement in a specific domain. How well can I write? How well can I do mathematics? What's the complexity of problems I can solve? That sort of thing. But we also have a lot of things that have to do with what we would call process factors. How do we participate in the classroom? How do we get along with others? How do we work in a group? How do we self-regulate and keep up with deadlines? Right? We've all had the famous, for every day late, it's 10% off. Well, that's a process factor. And then, of course, then the final piece in that is the progress pieces, where we look at, okay, this student's really struggling, but wow, look how far they've come. They've come such a long way. I want to reward them and recognize that sort of growth, even if it's not up to where we might expect people to be. We still want to recognize growth. So the problem, I guess, with traditional grades is that we try and do all of these three things within a single device, whether that be a letter grade, a symbol, a percentage mark, whatever. I mean, we try to do it all within a single indicator, and it's just very difficult to do and meet the purpose of grading. So to me, standards-based grading starts with the idea that you want to separate those things out, and they're all important and they're all meaningful, but when we clump them all together, it makes the grade a little bit more difficult to interpret or use or value. So, I don't know, is that close enough?
Yes, that does sound good. Now, let me can I ask a follow-up? And again, throw questions at us. There's lots of folks in the room. Don't be shy. It's perfectly fine. We're doing this for all of you that are here watching. And I'm sure your questions are going to be similar to all the questions in our Next Gen Academy cohorts. So a follow-up question that I'm struggling with right now at STEAM Academy, where we're sort of implementing a standards-based grading system here in Fayette County, is really trying to distinguish between a letter grade, like a letter grade B, for instance, and like the meaning of proficient, if you're using a sort of a standards-based grading model that has sort of different categories. So talk to me like how I can explain to parents the difference between a B and proficient, and if there is any difference, or what you sort of think about that.
Well, I mean, I think the first thing you have to always start with is kind of what's the purpose of the grades that you're giving, and that's really an important step, is to write that out, because any methods that you decide to pursue or tactics you decide to implement, you always want to go back and compare them to your purpose, and if there's a mismatch, then you need to say, well, we probably shouldn't do that. But in terms of specifically about the proficiency question, proficiency and mastery they can be such amorphous terms, and I don't think of proficiency or mastery as a binary state, like you either master it or you haven't. I think there's a range of mastery, and people will often talk about the example of like a martial arts, and like we get a black belt, well, it shows mastery. Well, not quite, because there's actually 10 degrees of black. So really, the first degree says, okay, you're really ready to be a serious student, and now you can spend the next, 40 years moving it up. But not to say that you're not proficient as a black belt, but you're on a continuum of mastery. So I would kind of start with the teachers and with the parents, the team, and the leadership, and just kind of say, well, what does an A mean? So if we say a student gets an A and or whatever, what does that say about that student? And same thing with the B, same thing with the C. People talk about a C being not mastery. I'm like, okay, I can get that, but it's a certain degree of mastery. If you got C's in law school, now you wouldn't graduate, but that wouldn't mean that you absolutely knew nothing about the law. It might be the most basic level of mastery. And so I think that's really the common that you need to have. Now, of course, what you can do in terms of evaluating, but what we don't do enough in the work is we don't actually evaluate what our grades currently tell us. So if you were to look at how do your grades align with some other proficiency benchmarks, you might say, okay, we're going to look at all the grades in our school for math, and we're going to compare it to K-Prep or some other exam. And we're going to look at what's the proficiency agreement between what this other external examination says. And you don't expect them to say the exact same thing, but you do expect some sort of convergence. So, for example, if you have 80% of the students who are getting A's in your school and are coming back as apprentice or novice, well, that's a problem. That's really, I mean, we need to ground our discussions on this in evidence, and we don't do that enough. I mean, I haven't seen enough people doing that and actually coming back and using that to monitor their implementation. But that's what I would kind of say. I mean, I would ask you, Justin, what do you want B to mean? So if a student gets a B at a course at STEAM, and then they go and take the end of course exam or K-Prep or whatever it is, should they come back as proficient on that, or what's the probability they'll come back as proficient? Do you think, okay, maybe it's 80%, 75%? That's what I would kind of ask to the staff.
Yeah, I think I would respond to that by saying that the probability of those passing those types of summative assessments at the end should be relatively high, really high, 95%. If we're reaching proficiency, that should be a pretty close indicator on those same types of questions. But I guess the question that we continue to struggle with is the question of trust around teachers. I think that there's a lot of embedded trust that we have to place in our teachers when we try to define these words like proficiency in ways that are not sort of our standard type of testing environment. And so I like the concept of sort of having to defend proficiency, and we're putting a lot of the onus on students to sort of do a lot of their own defending of these benchmarks. But it's a question that I think we're still very much negotiating, and one that sort of might change over time. I think it's a mix for us between sort of summative assessments that are sort of multiple choice-ish based and sort of more portfolio defense type of stuff at the moment. But ultimately, I think proficiency should mean that we don't need to cover this material again in the next sequence of courses. One of the things that we see so frequently in schools that we're trying to move away from in STEAM is sort of repeating content every year repeating content. And so for us, proficiency means that you have that material at a level that we probably don't need to repeat it next year. I don't know if that's a possibility or not.
There you kind of set out a way to monitor your implementation. So you can kind of say, okay, next year we're going to look at all those students that we said were proficient at the end of this year, and how many of these students do we have to do some serious, we're not talking just refresher, we're talking serious remediation of content that we said we mastered last year. And if that's, so that almost, if that's kind of what your definition is, that becomes your way to monitor it. And again, that's an important part of all of this stuff, is how do you, setting your goals and just monitoring the progress towards them. And again, I don't think we do that enough.
So can I ask you a question that came in earlier as we were advertising this Hangout? We have a question around rubrics and how rubrics and standards-based grading relate, and sort of your feelings on how heavily we need to have pre-built rubrics in a standards-based grading model versus other models.
Well, I think rubrics are very powerful because you're starting to describe what the evidence looks like. And our fixation with percentages being objective and absolute have really led us into a lot of the problems we have. And so I think, and for parents a percentage number, and they think they know what it means, and teachers think they know what it means, but they don't. We don't. I mean, it could mean anything. You know, people forget that. Okay, yes, 90% does not necessarily mean high standards if the items are grapefruits. If you're kind of throwing softballs, it doesn't mean anything. I ask people, so if you got a 70%, is that a good grade? If I asked you that, if a student got a 70%, would you consider that a good grade? Typically.
Would I?
Yeah.
No. I don't think.
If you're taking the AP exam, that means you would get a 5.
Right.
So it's relative to the context of the evidence produced. And so I think from rubric standpoints, the rubrics, even if there's not necessarily a rubric for every assignment, the rubrics that really describe what does achievement look like at the various tiers. And again, that's really all we're talking about here. I don't think the purpose of grades should be to finally discriminate between students. I don't want to say that this student is a little bit better than this student. I just want to kind of know, where's the student fall? Are they really knocking it out of the park? Are they solid? Are they got a basic grasp, but that's about it? Or they're really struggling. I think that's sort of all. That's the amount of separation we need. I think rubrics really come into play there because they help, and the development of them is really important because they help establish a shared expectation and a shared vision of what achievement looks like. And to me, that's what the standard and standards-based grading is all about. It's not about Common Core or this or that or whatever. It's about, do you have a shared expectation about what achievement looks like?
Okay, so another question that has come in is around, is standards-based grading a better fit for any particular levels of the school system? So do you see standards-based grading as a better fit at elementary, middle, high, university? Have you had thoughts like that? Or like if a district wanted to try it somewhere, where might that be the easiest place to try?
The easiest place to try is normally elementary. And I notice I said easiest. Where I think it works best, it's just good grading practice. It would work at any level. It just that depends on people's commitment and what they think the purpose of grading is. I think you can I'm working, for example, with a district in Wisconsin, and they are actually starting at the high school, which is really very rare, but they're one of the biggest districts in Wisconsin. They are starting at the high school. So I think you can start anywhere. But elementary is typically the easiest place to start, and that's because you don't get into sticky wickets like athletic eligibility and keys money. Ooh, that's the first thing that comes up. But if people get less A's, they won't get keys money. Sure, but if your grades are inflated and don't really mean anything, that keys money will be gone because how many students do we know flame out in the first semester or two, or first year or two? So I think it's best practice. I think it can be done anywhere. Now, where you start depends on the context that you're coming. And there's lots of different entry points into doing standards-based grading. Often people try and eat the elephant at one time instead of just taking a small bite.
Okay, cool. So one more around homework. So obviously there's some, where does homework fit in a standards-based model? Is it something that should be pulled out or is it something that can feed into like the standards-based content grade? Talk a little. We get a lot of questions around homework, and so if you want to talk a bit about that, would be useful.
Sure. I mean, again, you always go back to the purpose. So what is the primary purpose of homework? And as we're thinking of homework, we're traditionally thinking of you get done with the day's exercise and the teacher says, I want you to go back and complete these problems or work on this thing or practice doing this. And so when we talk about homework in that sense, not work done out of class necessarily, but work assigned to give extended practice, practice, you should be allowed to make mistakes. Practice is different than the game, so to speak. So I think it's a separate issue. There's lots of reasons why kids don't do homework. Could be they don't understand it. Could be they're bored with it. They think it's too easy. Could be they have other commitments. Whether it be they're on a traveling sports team or maybe they have to take care of siblings. Who knows? Even then, we don't really know, did they do the homework? How much help did they get doing their homework? Did they attempt it, but they did it in a group? How much parental support did they get? There's all these things that kind of go into homework. So from a measurement, the validity of measurement, is it actually measuring what they know? It's kind of sketchy. And if it's really its purpose is practice and it's really its purpose is formative and diagnostic, you expect there to be some sort of follow-up and intervention. So if you expect there to be follow-up and intervention, and you expect that intervention to produce better results, why would you count homework? You can still report it. You can still put it in the grade book so parents can see, hey, Johnny, you haven't turned in any assignments. What's going on here? You tell me that you didn't have any homework, but now I see a bunch of missing assignments over here. Let's focus on this.
Okay. Cool, thanks for that. So thanks for everyone for joining up in the room. I want to leave with one more kind of question, Gerry, and I want to give you an opportunity to sort of talk a little bit about your own system. So there's a burgeoning software side of standards-based grading, and some platforms are trying to allow you to promote kind of a non-percentile-based grading system. You, of course, have one of those, and it's one that we're particularly fond of here in Kentucky, and we promote in NextGen. So talk a little bit about what you offer with the standards-based grading software model, and how people can get access to that model.
Well, basically, we kind of took the approach of saying, it's really fundamentally stripping it down to, let's get rid of all the complicated mathematics and routines and all of this that we're putting in to try and make it objective when it's not. And just really kind of coming down to having teachers look at the evidence they've collected and say, okay, based on the evidence you have in front of you, where's a student? And then schools sort of define the levels of proficiency. And most schools either do a 4-level or 3-level. Middle school, secondary almost always do a 4-level, so it can sort of line up with GPA. Some elementary schools do a 3-point level because they really don't want to get into fighting between whether a student is advanced or just proficient. They just want to have one big block that says they're doing fine. And basically that's all there is to it. I mean, we sort of load in the course rosters from Infinite Campus, and we try to keep the interface as simple and scaled down that's necessary to do the job. And I can show it if that would be easier.
Okay, sure. Just for a sec or two.
Yeah, let me pop that up over here.
While we have it, there's an easy question that popped up in our chat from Abby, who asks, will we be getting into standards-based grading at the Teacher Academy in Hazard next week, since relative to when we're broadcasting?
I think next week is mostly going to be about project-based learning, which, of course, has a connection. You should evaluate your projects using a standards-based approach. But I don't think we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of it next week.
We did we got into it a little bit, and I don't know if we did it for the Teacher Academy early on. I don't remember if we did that one for the Teacher Academy in Hazard or not. But we'll check on that. Abby, thanks for that reminder, and make sure that the Teacher Academy has access to it. I will say on the Teacher Academy side, this is something you'll need your leaders somewhat involved in. You can give this great data and run this in your class on your own, but if you're wanting to run a bit of a school-wide model, it's something that you're going to have administration participating in. So show us a little bit about the model.
So basically, you kind of go in, you say there's English language arts. I'm going to go in and put in a description. This goes on every student's report. Just kind of says, hey, this is what we've been doing these 9 weeks. And that's important. Parents like that a lot. Why? Because students don't give them any information of what goes on in their daily lives. I have no idea what my son does day to day. I have to ask his teacher. So parents like that part. It's very simple. Then you go to put in the scores, as you can kind of see here, and each column represents a big domain, not every single learning target that you've ever covered in just what are the big areas: language, foundational skills, reading, speaking, listening, writing, and some process things. Comes prepared for class, respects others and the property, completes independent classwork. Great. Fill in the integers that correspond, save it, and you're done. Then you've got a report card. Domains, academics, process, and cool teachers. Pictures or no pictures. People either love that or they hate that. I don't have a dog in that fight. They can pick. I will just one other thing, sort of while we're just to answer kind of Abby's question. Another, Abby, if you want to find out more about it, you can go to the digital driver's license and register for a teacher account. And once you get your teacher account, you can log in, and what we have there is a standards-based grading license. So if you want to kind of look at this, we've got a few cases in there. What is standards-based grading? Are percentage grades really more precise? How do we get around averaging? Lots of great stuff there.
Awesome. All right, and I just posted a link to the digital driver's license, a link up on YouTube so that folks can get access both to the Otis platform as well as the digital driver's license. Gerry, any parting thoughts? Thank you so much for joining us here in the Next Gen chat.
Yeah. For all of you folks that are interested in doing this and frustrated with kind of Power School or Infinite Campus or whatever you're using as you try and change your grading practices, remember, they work for you. So let's speak up. There's some very simple things that people can do and that they could do that would make a lot of this process a lot easier. Like allowing people just to turn off the auto percentage calculation and just allow them to put scale scores in and give the aggregate scale score. That would be so easy, and that would move people so far. But they're not going to do it unless you guys complain. I complain them all the time. I send them all sorts of notes on Twitter and say, hey, I got another complaint email, Infinite Campus. Hey, but they're not going to listen to me because I don't pay the bills. But you guys pay the bills, so you need to complain.
Awesome.
And that'll make my life easier because I can stop doing this.
Yeah, that would be great. I know. As we implement these reforms, the best case is always like we don't have to do this anymore. So thank you so much, Dr. Swan, for joining us in our Next Gen chat. We're part of the Next Gen Leadership Academy here at the UK College of Education. If you want to know more about us, check out education.uky.edu and look for Next Gen on that page. Thank you so much, and we'll see you at the next Next Gen chat. Thanks, Gerry.
Otisonline.org. It's the best. Check it out.
Awesome. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.